welcome to the very first episode of That's What I'm Talking About. I'm Mary Clay, and today I am joined by Casey Winters from Hello from Elsewhere. Welcome, Casey.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love Lord of the Rings, so this is super exciting for me.
Awesome. I'm so excited that you're excited, because that's what all this is about, is that I know nothing, and I'm going to talk to people who know everything.
I don't know about know everything, but a few things.
You certainly know more than I do, and that's the goal. Yeah, when I say I know nothing about Lord of the Rings, I pretty much know nothing.
So we're coming in blind to this then.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, I know. That's what makes it super exciting. It's really refreshing to come into something this epic with such a big following and legacy and everything and know nothing about it.
I'm kind of jealous of you, actually. It's so exciting.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm really jealous when people are like, "Oh yeah, I've never read like the Harry Potter books." And I'm like, "You should, because they're great and you can experience all this."
And then we can talk about it.
Yeah, like you get to experience all this magicalness for the first time, and that's so amazing. And I wish I was you. Cool. So just to kick things off is the prologue, which essentially nothing happens.
It's a bit of a recap of like what happens in The Hobbit and then some extra stuff. Yeah, there's not a lot in there.
Exactly. Yeah, I was about to say it's essentially a previously on The Hobbit. Yeah. I looked up the SparkNotes summaries just to see what they would say, because I thought, it's always interesting to see what summaries deem important enough to take note of. And the very first thing that SparkNotes says about the prologue is dense with detail. And that's so accurate, because as I was reading this, I was slightly panicking because Tolkien is just throwing out all of these names of, kinds of hobbits and famous hobbits and lands and all this other stuff. And all
about their pipeweed, if you want to know about that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, oh no, this is going to go downhill fast, because I'm going to lose track of who's who, where are we, what's happening. So in your experience, how important is it that I keep track of all of these different lands and people and whatnot?
The thing I love about Lord of the Rings is that I feel like you can go as deep as you want to, but if you don't want to go that deep, you can still get so much out of the story. So I feel like it's really up to the reader, which is something that I love about it.
I suspect that the deeper I get into the books, I'll be able to pick up on those details that he drops earlier on and make those connections. But I mean, especially since I'm probably going to be, just for preparing for this episode, I did a mixture of the audiobook and then the actual book. And then I went back and kind of skimmed the chapter just once more. So I'm hoping to make those connections, because I really enjoy all those details. And it really seems like that's where Tolkien excels, is he has all these details.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's his major interest in all of this, is just creating a history and a culture and a language of the setting. And I think that interests him far more than like even the story or the characters. Not to say he doesn't care about those, but for him, really the world building is top priority, I think.
Exactly. Side note, how do you pronounce the author's name?
So that's been up for debate. The last I heard, and a lot of this came with the Tolkien movie, is that it's Tolkien, not Tolkien. But even people that have been fans for years have said Tolkien. So I don't know that I have any authority to say one way or another. I'll probably go back and forth in this episode. So
yeah, cool. Anyway, so real quick, before we move into the first chapter, I just want to talk about the last line of the prologue, and I highlighted it because it made me pause and think like, wow, this feels like I'm about to go on a journey. And it says, "At this point, this history begins." And history is capitalized with an H. And I'm like, wow, that's a great like ending to a prologue, setting you up like this is where this tale is beginning. And it just, I don't know, it got me really excited, which I guess is the point of prologues, is to get you excited for the tale to come.
Right. And it's emblematic of how Tolkien like treats his story. He does treat it as history. He considers himself more of like a historian of this world than the actual author. And the way he talks about it, if you look into like reading his letters and things, it's always very much more of like he's more talking about it like from a perspective of someone that's learning about this place and the peoples and the language, rather than being the creator of it, even though he is. And I think that probably just helps him in the writing of it as well.
And he, at some point in the prologue too, it says something about, he's talking about Bilbo's adventure that we know happens in The Hobbit. And the way he describes it, he says many copies contain the true account. And that it really makes it feel like this is a real world, and that there are these historical books that contain this story, like it's a textbook that hobbits would read in their schools growing up or something, you know?
Yeah, and the conceit is that Bilbo and Frodo have narrated this story, and that we're just sort of privy to that to get to read it. And I love that about it.
My question for experienced Lord of the Rings fan is, I know that chronologically speaking, The Hobbit, the events of The Hobbit happens before the events of the trilogy. Did The Hobbit come out after the trilogy? Is it like a Lord of the Rings, not a Star Wars situation?
No, I think the reason some might think that is just because of the popularity. The Lord of the Rings has become more popular over the years, but The Hobbit was published first. So the Hobbit was published in 1937. And Lord of the Rings wasn't published until 1954. So it was actually quite a while after. The interesting thing is The Hobbit was very, very popular, and it still is. It wasn't like it was forgotten because of The Lord of the Rings. In fact, right after The Hobbit was published, the publishers were scrambling because people loved it so much and they wanted a sequel. Tolkien, he really wanted to honor that, but at the same time, he felt like he'd told so much about hobbits in The Hobbit that he didn't really know what to do. And he had like the overall history of Middle-earth in mind, but he didn't have a lot of the details down for Lord of the Rings. I think that's part of the reason why it took him so long to actually publish the Lord of the Rings. That's quite a gap from 1937 to 54. But yeah, a lot of that was just down to his creative process. But yeah, the Hobbit did come first. So.
Oh, okay, cool. I did not know that. You said 1937. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I have more trivia. I don't want to like share too much of this if it's like not interesting, but like
no, I love trivia like this.
Okay. The cool thing about The Hobbit, so when he was getting that published, the publisher's son, Rainer Unwin, he read like the manuscript of The Hobbit, and the publishers actually relied on this 10-year-old kid a lot for things, especially the children's books. They're like, if he likes it, we'll publish it, and he loved The Hobbit. And Tolkien like came to rely on him for Lord of the Rings too. Like he sent him the first chapter that he was writing for Fellowship, the one we're talking about today, just a couple of years later. So the son would have been probably 11 or 12 at that point. So even though it didn't get published till 1954, people were reading it, in between that gap already. So I just love that the kid had such a major impact on not only The Hobbit, but the Lord of the Rings as well.
That'll be what I tackle after the trilogy. Well, first, after I finish all the books, or the trilogy, then I'll move on to The Hobbit, and then I'll move on to everything else, I suppose. Yeah. Because there's a lot. There's a lot. Going back to that first line of that SparkNote summary, dense with detail, right, I think is a great way to summarize basically all of this.
Yeah. Well, and I've tried to get through the Silmarillion, and I'm still working on it. It's not one that's come easy to me. It's more biblical, and if that one's really hard to keep track of the names. Like, really? I'm gonna have to like write them down and write who they are, because there's just a lot. So like I've read some of the history like in summary, but the actual texts I haven't, other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Currently, as we're recording this, I'm halfway through chapter 2, and I can already tell the insane amount of detail and world building and everything that he's done. You phrasing it as like this is more like a history of this land, yeah, and details of these people and everything, as opposed to this fantasy quest adventure. It makes complete sense, and it's probably good. Like, I'm really glad that you said that, because it's gonna like reframe how I read this going forward. And that makes sense that, given that there was that, what was it, 20-year gap between The Hobbit and the rest of the books makes a lot of sense when you look at all of the detail and history and everything that he put into this.
Right, yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. So moving on to chapter 1, A Long Expected Party. Did I even get the name of the chapter right?
Yes, you did.
I did. Did I read the right chapter? Crap.
Yeah.
It's like when you show up to class and you've done the wrong reading.
Right. I have dreams about that, nightmares all the time.
Oh my God. It's the worst feeling in the world. Because you're like, no, I did work. I did the homework. Right. I just didn't do the right homework.
I learned something. It just wasn't what you wanted me to learn.
Exactly. So starting off, once again, kind of how I talked about how the last line of the prologue just sets up for something feeling epic. Similarly, I got a similar feeling from just the first line of this first chapter. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. And that just feels, I mean, coming from a background of I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, that feels very similar to Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of Privet Drive, because it's this sounds like a very normal sentence, right. But it sets up just enough curiosity that you're like, 11st? Right. He's having a 11st birthday party. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Right. There's a lot of whimsy to that opening that I love.
Yeah. Whimsy is another great word to describe all this. Because I really truly going into this did not know at all what to expect reading this. And I think for some reason I thought it was going to be very like, not archaic language, mm-hmm. but I mean, you said it was written in, between let's say he was working on it for, 1940 to
1954, yeah.
54, yeah, like he was working on it, 80 some years ago, 60 some years ago, and that we talk very differently and we write very differently, today. So I was not expecting to have this level of intrigue and curiosity and whimsy right off the bat in the first chapter. I thought I was going to have to like power through just to, get into the meat of it to get invested. But immediately I was like, this is a very cute little town of people that he's built and that he's describing.
Well, and I love that, well, like, even if you just have like a cursory knowledge of like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, like that Lord of the Rings is probably going to be a little bit darker. So I think you don't expect that sense of like, there's really a sense of humor, especially in this chapter. It's not like necessarily laugh out loud, but like it's chuckle worthy. Like there's funny stuff in this chapter, especially. And I always forget that, even though I've read it before, I go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be a dark story because I know what comes. But I'm just always struck by Tolkien. He does have a sense of humor, and I love that.
Yeah, it's funny that you said it wasn't laugh out loud, because there were certain parts where I was laughing out loud, or at least giving a good chuckle. Like he is, he's very funny, and he has a great sense of humor. And I think Tolkien and I would get along great in this day and age, because it seems like he has a very dry, sarcastic, underrated sense of humor that kind of flies over the heads of a lot of people.
Right.
And I'm wondering if maybe he inserted this humor so thinking back to when these books were published and they were at the, they're still popular, it's still a popular series now, but when it was at its peak of popularity, when probably parents were reading it with their kids or something, it seems like that, how like Pixar or something will put in jokes for the adults, and it's the stuff that parents will be able to appreciate or older audiences will be able to appreciate, so that it keeps them interested as well as the kids.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's within the first like couple of pages or so, I was laughing because even in how do you say, is it Hobbiton?
Yeah,
Hobbitown?
Yeah, Hobbiton, yep.
Hobbiton? Okay, cool. I'm so excited for the amount of mispronunciation I'm going to make throughout this podcast.
It's totally cool. You got to start somewhere, right?
Like I can completely, so I started reading the Harry Potter books after the movies came out. So I was like, yeah, of course it's Hermione.
Right. Right.
So when I heard that people thought it was like my one, I was like, well, how did you get there? But looking at, these words now, considering I haven't, had the movies to go off of or anything, I can completely understand how people pronounce things as they read them in their head.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in Hobbiton, it seems very, like we were saying, whimsical. It seems very like it's it is a different world, but it seems like it's in this safe little bubble. But then even within it, there's this like little gossip circle.
Right.
That's like gathering, and they're like talking smack about Bilbo and they're talking about also providing a little bit of like, in case you didn't read The Hobbit, here's all the drama that went down. And I love that the Saxville Bagginses are really salty about the fact that Bilbo basically cheated them out of having one of them be the heir to Bag End, and he made Frodo his heir. Right. And they're really peeved about that.
To say the least. They keep popping up in various ways trying to get Bag End, it seems like.
Yeah. And I love that, like, even in this far-off fantasy world, there's still these, like, small moments of, like, everyday, like, family drama or politics or something.
Right. There's still people sitting around gossiping. That's a universal scene.
Exactly. That's why I love it. Oh my gosh, it was so great. I just wrote in my notes, all caps, drama. Anyway, so everyone in Hobbiton is gearing up for this big party, and it's super exciting. And if you've ever been a little kid and you know that your friend is having a birthday party soon and you have like the invitation on your refrigerator, you can remember that excitement. But I'm just imagining it's like tenfold because everyone's like, this is gonna be a banger.
Yeah.
It's gonna, like, just imagining the like biggest rave that's ever come to Hobbiton. Right. And I love, we'll get there more once we get to this part of the chapter, but I love that it's all a big setup for Bilbo's exit.
Right. It's
basically.
All a joke.
Yeah, I love that. Anyway, so Gandalf comes into town and is helping out, and then there's talk that he is going to be performing his own fireworks, which I have to imagine are the Weasley fireworks on steroids.
Right, yeah. They're clearly influenced by magic in some way. Like, these aren't just regular fireworks. And it even says that the hobbits know Gandalf for his fire and his smoke and lights, and they don't even realize that he is more than that. Like, to them, he's just a fireworks guy that might be magic.
Yeah, I love that. I love that Gandalf is this amazing wizard, and then all the hobbits are like, yeah, but his fireworks are pretty great.
And he just comes and disturbs the peace. Like,
yeah, I love Gandalf.
I do too. He's one of my favorites for sure.
He's great, and I think that's really fitting for me too, considering Dumbledore is also one of my favorite characters. Yeah. So it's very fitting that these wise old wizards are some of my favorites. Right. But I love that Gandalf is basically just this like pyrotech. Yeah. Also, I mean, I'm sure I'll get into this more into the series, but I wonder what first of all, are there other wizards like Gandalf, or is he basically like the wizard?
There are other wizards, yes. I won't say more because I don't want to spoil it for you.
Well, yes. I have to wonder though what they all think of him, because they must think like he's an old kook going to like hang out with the hobbits and put on fireworks shows for someone's birthday party.
Yeah, I'll just say you're not wrong there. What others feel about him.
Oh man, I can't wait. Can't wait to get into all of that. So meanwhile, it's also Frodo's birthday, and I love this description because I feel like it describes me as in my current phase of life as a 24-year-old. So Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33.
I love that so much. It's so funny because hobbits don't live that much longer. Like they say the old Took, who's like a famous old hobbit, just lived 130. So like their lifespan isn't that much more than humans, and yet they come of age at 33. Like I'm 31. I'd still be a child to a hobbit. That's pretty sweet.
Well, it's just so funny that they have this like defined age of like, okay, now you're an adult.
Right.
And it seems like the way you would have thought of that when you were when I was little, I thought being an adult was like graduating college, and
Right.
I graduated college 2 years ago, and Lord, I do not feel like an adult at all.
Then when you become adult, you realize being an adult is just filling out forms and waiting in lines, and it's not quite the same.
Yeah, I'm currently trying to find furniture for my apartment that I move in 3 weeks, and I'm like, mattresses are so expensive.
Right. I just need somewhere to sleep.
The good news is that I have a bed frame, no mattress, and my mom made a joke that I do have a queen size blow up mattress. So worst comes to worst, I could sleep on that for a couple days. Maybe a couple weeks, but
right. Long term might not be good for your back there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And the other part of it is that my apartment is on the 3rd floor and there's no elevator in the building. So I'm like, how am I going to get all this stuff up the stairs? And everyone's like, hire movers. I'm like, do you think I can afford movers? Do you think I'm at a phase in my life where I can afford movers? So that's like my frame of reference right now for where I am is what an adult is, of what is like someone who has a mattress and can hire movers.
Yes.
So once I get there,
then you're an adult.
Yeah. So the other thing is, so at age 33, are they like, I don't know, I'm just imagining that like as soon as he like blows out the candles, he's 33, it's like, okay, now it's time to settle down and have kids. Right. I'm assuming the hobbits like get married and have families, right?
Yeah, they're monogamous. They're supposed to just be kind of like middle class English, like is really how they're supposed to feel. And yeah, they settle down, and it's interesting, the coming of age thing, because it's not like after that they go and get a job, because, you know, they have like apprenticeships. Like Sam is, his dad's the gardener, and Sam's sort of an apprentice gardener. And he's not of age yet either. I think he's similar in age to Frodo, but.
Yeah, I never thought about them having like job economy or something. Like I wonder what the employment rates are like in Hobbiton.
Mostly farmers, I think.
Yeah. But it's funny that we're talking about that now, because my next note is they make a note that for the party, they're having all of these locals provide resources and services for the party, and it felt like support local businesses.
Right.
It's like, is there a small business Saturday in the Shire? Because that's what I'm imagining.
It's probably every day.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Which is fun. Like, would there have been a way for them to like import stuff from other lands? Because it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am. I'm so excited to be wrong about everything. But it seems like the hobbits live in Hobbiton and they stay there and they're happy to be there. And it seems like they don't want part of the rest of the world, that they live in this protective bubble, and anything that infiltrates it kind of could rock the boat or something. Yeah,
you're spot on. They're very distrusting of anything outside of the Shire, and you see a lot of that in The Hobbit as well. But yeah, they don't want to go outside their bubble much. They don't. The reason that they gossip so much about Bilbo is because he went on an adventure, and that was enough, you know, that was against the grain enough for hobbits to cause a big stir in the community. And you'll see it like a little bit here too, because he brings some dwarves with him. Some dwarves are at his house, and yeah, that's not normal either. Like to have outsiders hanging out. It's a little more normal for Bilbo, but as you see, they think Bilbo's a little bit strange. And so much about the Hobbit way of life is like keeping up that appearance of propriety and just staying comfortable in their own comfortable space. And
then going back to the sense of humor again, is my very next note is hobbits are funny.
Yeah.
So the party begins, and specifically the part that I wrote down as being funny is there are hobbits who they come in and everyone receives a gift. And then there were some hobbits that went out the back entrance and then came back again to get another gift.
I love the gift giving, the gift giving tradition of hobbits, that they give gifts to other people on their birthday. But like in theory, I love that. But I'm thinking about myself. Like I get really anxious about giving presents to people and getting the right things. I'm realizing that like
same.
in Hobbiton, like my birthday would be the most panic-inducing day of the year. Like, I would not like that day.
Yeah. So yeah, what are all of these presents that he's giving out? Because in my mind, I'm imagining it's just like little like tinker toys. Like, okay, you get a yo-yo, you get, I don't know.
And they're all
paddleball.
Right. It mentions they're all like, or at least most of them are dwarven made. So that's why the dwarves come with a cart full of packages, is the things he's giving away at his party. And I think a lot of that just has to do with his relationship with the dwarves from the Hobbit book. And probably some of it might be some of the treasure, I guess. I don't know if he'd give away his treasure, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly. They don't give a lot of specifics for what those packages are.
And then, sorry, that just reminded me, there was in the prologue they mentioned backtracking all the way.
You're good.
Where is it? There's some. It's a word for things that they. A matham.
Yeah, like an object that they keep just because they don't really want to give it away, but it has no practical use. It's almost like we'd call like a trinket, or like I don't know what other words we have for it, but.
Yeah. So yeah, I just love that he gave this word for it, because it's it's very relatable that everyone has these things that has no use, there's no purpose in it, there's no reason to keep it, but you still keep it. And so and then I love that they have, if I remember correctly, that there's like this one, isn't there this one place where they keep all of the what are they, mathams? Is that how you say it?
Oh, like in their own house or whatever?
Yeah. Oh, maybe.
It might mention that in the prologue. I don't remember for sure.
Let me see. Oh, it says the Matham House.
Oh, yeah.
So I love that they've collected, it says the Matham House, it was called, for anything that hobbits had no immediate use for, but were unwilling to throw away, they called a Matham. Their dwellings were apt to become rather crowded with Mathams, and many of the presents that passed from hand to hand were of that sort. Yeah, so I'm imagining that for all of these presents and everything, that people just go into the Matham house, grab something, and then wrap it up and then give it away again.
Right. It's a perpetual regifting in the Hobbiton.
Yeah. And then I have to think that, like, at some point, the hobbits, there's got to be, like, a hoarders buried alive.
Right.
Somewhere in Hobbiton.
That's someone's job, is to help the people that have too many Mathams.
Oh my god. Do you think there's a Marie Kondo of the hobbits?
Absolutely. 100% there's a Marie Kondo.
Oh my gosh. This does not bring me joy. Throws it out. I'd love to see that Netflix special.
Oh my goodness.
That
sounds amazing.
I really want like someone to do a parody of this, where it's Marie Kondo and she comes into Hobbiton to help
with the Mathams.
Yeah. Oh, that would be so great. Anyway, so back to the party.
We can't come back from that.
I'm just imagining that it's just like pure, not chaos, but like just the entire town is there. There's this huge tent. Everyone's invited, and it sounds like there were some people from outside Hobbiton that somehow snuck in, because it mentioned something about, and some who were not invited as well, or something like that.
So you have the Shire, and the Shire is like a big, I don't know like area wise how big it is, but it's, you can think of it as like the whole countryside, and within the Shire is Hobbiton, which is like the town, which is the town. So not all the hobbits are in Hobbiton. There's hobbits in other farthings, they call them, all around the area. So some of them are traveling from quite far to get to Hobbiton. But then I guess some weren't invited, but everyone felt like they were invited, so they just came. But yeah, there are a lot of hobbits outside of Hobbiton as well. And then outside of the Shire is where we get into like dwarves and elves and men.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't even thinking about the difference between Hobbiton and the Shire, but that makes complete sense then. Okay, cool. I also love how he names everything. Like Hobbiton is hobbit
Yeah.
town. It's all very simplistic, and so for example, the Proudfoots are named for being proud of their feet.
Right. He's got big feet.
Yeah. It brings back that what we were talking about, how it's funny and it's whimsical, but it's also something that kids can enjoy, where it sounds like a very normal, on one hand you might think, oh wow, what a fun fantastical fantasy sounding name, and then once you break it down, you're like, oh no, it's just like Proudfoot or Hobbit town.
Right, exactly. And Tolkien was a master of languages. He taught languages at university, and so really that's where all this started, is from a place of language. So every name of a person or a place is very like specific, like it's very thought out. There's nothing that's just sort of thrown out there. Everything has a purpose.
Yeah, everything's a play on words. So the party's going on, everyone's having a great time. There are fireworks, and then Gandalf's fireworks go on for the grand finale. And I'm imagining it as like, there's some of the older hobbits who are like, oh, I would never, because it seems like some of them are like, that's too much. Yeah. Calm down. And then it seems like maybe a lesser population are really enjoying it, because you find out later that the hobbits start, I think, getting annoyed with Gandalf, and he doesn't have quite a great reputation there anymore, especially after his involvement with Bilbo at his party.
Yeah, for sure. And I always got the feeling that most hobbits that are adults, even like the idea of fireworks is way too much for them.
Oh, that's true.
Only the kids probably really enjoy it, and I think the idea of fireworks would be a bit too.
Yeah, it's like too much outside of their comfort
It's
zone.
too adventurous.
Like
it's not normal. It's not natural.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. That's a great way to think of it.
I just love the language, and Tolkien is very much a poet, and there's like that passage of all talking about the fireworks was just fantastic. Like there's a part that just says, there were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles, or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. There was a red thunderstorm and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. I just love that. Like it's so good. I mean, it's
so descriptive, and it's so again with that detail, it really paints a picture.
Yeah, I love it. And you don't get language like that in most modern books now. I think adjectives are frowned on in that sort of way, but so it might be a little bit flowery for some people, but I love it.
Yeah. Totally agree. It really is a different kind of writing, because the content itself is very magical, but the writing feels magical. The words feel magical. It feels very poetic, and it's very like imagery just like shoved everywhere you can.
Right. Yeah. Like there's another part, jumping ahead a little bit, but where Bilbo's talking to Gandalf, and he says he feels like butter that's been scraped over too much bread. That's always been an image that is like always just indelibly stuck in my head. Like that's not an image that will ever leave. It's simple, but it's just perfect.
Man, I just constantly wonder how authors are able to like think of these. It's just crazy how there are all of these words that we all know in this world, and they're able to pick out the right ones and construct them in a way that make it such a fascinating thing to read and be excited about. Yeah, so the fireworks section was amazing. Oh, and so then the fireworks ends with, "That's the signal for supper," said Bilbo. Yeah. I love that it was all leading up to food, basically.
I think everything relates to food with the hobbits. Because even later when they are shocked by his joke, they feel like they need something to cure them of the shock. And it's like talking about how, well, I guess we better eat and drink, because that's the only, we deserve it after having gone through that joke of Bilbo's.
Talking again about how much I do and don't know about this series, that is one thing I do know, is that the hobbits have like breakfast and second breakfast and all that. They have several meals throughout the day, and they have I don't think it's gotten to the point in the book yet where they explicitly say what their meal schedule is, but even now you can tell that a lot of their culture and celebration and everything is based around food.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is great, and I relate too.
Yeah. Oh, my children ask for second breakfast every day. Like, it's a thing in my house. One day we had like said, I think we just called a snack a second breakfast, and they just like latched onto that, and now every day they just ask, "Is it time for second breakfast?" Like,
that's
every
amazing.
day.
That's amazing. Yeah, I babysit a lot of different families in my neighborhood pretty frequently, and they're all around under 5, and I'm amazed at how much kids eat.
No, they don't stop. It's never ending. Like, growing up before I was a parent, the stereotype was always that like teenagers eat a lot, you know, and then the biggest shock of parenthood is realizing that it's not teenagers, it's just children eat a lot. They're always hungry.
That, talking about second breakfast for your kids, like, I can totally see how. I was about to say, did Tolkien have kids? But yes, we know that he has kids. So I wonder if he took that from, you know, and added that into the books of seeing his kids and how much they eat, and seeing this childlike nature and adding it into the Hobbits.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, the Hobbit started as a story he was just telling to his kids, and that's where it all started from. And even in this book, later you'll meet a character named Tom Bombadil, who is a character that he had just created at story time with his kids. So it's definitely a huge part of all of Middle Earth, really.
Aw, I love that. That's so sweet. I love hearing stories like that. How
I do too.
Like, I think like Winnie the Pooh started off like that too, where it was just like he was just telling stories to his kid, and then wanted more people to hear about it. That's awesome. So kind of on a similar note, what was the audience in mind that Tolkien wrote these books for? Because so nowadays we have all of these big descriptors for books, like it's YA, it's middle grade, it's, you know, adult fiction, it's science fiction, or something, you know. And I know back then Tolkien never would have imagined what YA would mean. I don't think. But in my mind, these seem like very adult books, not in the content, but just in the fact that, I mean, they're not exactly, you know, they're not short books. They're not super long, but they're not short books.
Right.
It's not from the perspective of a child. It's not very childlike language. But at the same time, we're talking about it, and this is all very childlike, whimsical characters and behavior and land. So who do you think Tolkien had in mind when he was writing these
when
books?
he wrote The Hobbit, it was definitely a children's book. It was, you know, it was marketed. I don't know how much marketing there was, but it was aimed at children for sure. And children loved it and wanted more, like I said. The problem was Tolkien had so many ideas, but so many of his ideas were from a darker place, or it just had a grander scale that wasn't necessarily for children. And so I think he felt a little bit stuck for a bit, because he knew that people wanted a sequel to The Hobbit, but everything he was coming up with story-wise wasn't really sequel. And he doesn't call Lord of the Rings a sequel just because he doesn't consider it a children's book. So I think it does go from a children's story in The Hobbit to something aimed more for adults in The Lord of the Rings. And I think that this first chapter is a good example of that, because it really is a bridge. Like, it's almost like an epilogue to The Hobbit, or even a prologue to The Lord of the Rings, because it's sort of passing the torch from Bilbo, the main character of The Hobbit, to Frodo, who's going to be the major character of this story. And this chapter, just in terms of tone as well, is very much like The Hobbit. And so I think it really is that bridge between a children's story into the grander scale, the bigger, darker world of Lord of the Rings.
So it's sounding like, I mean, given I know nothing, so it sounds like Lord of the Rings gets really dark as it goes on. Yeah,
and maybe not dark like in the sense of how we think of darkness now, just because this was the 50s, you know?
Yeah.
But just in terms of tone and just the themes that it's working with are much more adult, and Tolkien did that because he felt it gave it more of a sense of realism, that you couldn't just have the whimsy and the humor. It didn't feel real. It didn't have the stakes to it.
Well, I'm excited for when I eventually read The Hobbit, because it'll feel like, I mean, obviously it will be going backwards because it's going backwards in time, and it's going backwards in, you know, content and everything. So the fireworks ends, the feast begins, and after the feast comes the big speech where the birthday boy Bilbo gives a big toast. And I love that they make a note to say that this is this is everyone's least favorite part of the party, because it means that like they're not partying anymore, they're not eating.
Right.
They just have to sit there and listen to someone talk.
It's a hobbit nightmare.
Yeah. Which like I can relate. Right. At my sister's wedding was, let's see, like a month and a half ago, and I was in the bridal party and we were all standing around and everyone's giving, so my sister and her husband did their first dance, and then my father and my sister, and then the groom and his mother, and then my uncle came and gave a prayer, and it was just this long period of just standing around. And I'm like, can I get a drink, please? It's 90 degrees. Can I please go get like a ham biscuit thing and a drink in the other hand, and that's it, and I'll be good.
So this is relatable.
Yeah. Again, I love that the hobbits are so food driven. Yeah. They're food driven people.
And I love the part, more the humor, when they're all shouting, "Here, here, here," and they kept on repeating it in chorus. It says, seeming reluctant to follow their own advice. Just little lines like that.
It's like
it's brilliant.
It's like in like elementary school when your teacher would be like, "Everyone, shut up," and then people are still whispering, and then there's always that one kid that's like, "Shh, guys, seriously, stop talking," and then it's like, "Well, you're talking now, Chad," and it just goes on.
Stop yelling.
Yeah. Like, you're yelling now. So this is where begins when I think I officially started really feeling like Bilbo is amazing. So he begins his speech. He welcomes everyone, of course. I like how he outlines his speech, and he says, like, there are 3 things that have brought us all together. Talks about all of it, and then the last one says, I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve.
That's like literally my favorite line in all of literature. I love that line so much.
The thing that made me laugh more was what follows immediately after. It says, this was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment.
You do have to like break it apart. It's a tricky sentence there.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, as I was reading through that, what he says the first time, it didn't really, it went over my head. And it wasn't until it said that they were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment that I was like, wait, is that an insult? And I had to go back and read it a couple more times to be like, oh, that's savage.
It's kind of like both. Like, it's almost like partly a compliment, partly not. Like that first line, he says, I don't know half of you, half as well as I should like. So it's like, there's some of you here that I don't know as well as I should, and I'd like to. And then the second part is like, there's a small part of you I don't like very much, but you probably deserve a little bit better than that. So it's like, it's not quite an insult, but it sort of is,
it's like
it's kind of a compliment.
Yeah, it's like a backhanded compliment. When you see someone wearing a bathing suit, and you're like, oh wow, I wish I was that brave to wear a bathing suit like that. Right. And you're like, thank you. You're like, I didn't know I was brave, but okay.
I'm just swimming, but okay.
Yeah. So he's going through this speech, gets to the end, and says, thirdly and finally, I wish to make an announcement. I regret to announce that though, as I said, 11 years is far too short a time to spend among you, this is the end. I am going. I am leaving. Now, goodbye. And then he pieces out.
Literally disappears.
Yeah, and so I love that there's this huge setup of this whole party, this speech and everything, and it all culminates in him doing the most dramatic exit of all time. And what I also like is, in my version of the book, announcement is capitalized, end is capitalized, and now and goodbye are capitalized.
Yeah, I think mine are the same.
And I love that because it really, for me, as I was reading it, I was like, he sounds dramatic AF.
He's almost a little bit into The Hobbit. Like he didn't really want to go on an adventure, and at this point he's gone on an adventure. Everyone seems to give him a hard time for it. He's almost like becoming that person that everyone is gossiping about, even if he wasn't that person to begin with.
Yeah, I wrote down that Bilbo is iconic. Because I wish I had the gall to leave like that. And I also like that he put up this front of being such a friendly and welcoming and happy person to be like, yeah, I love everyone here. This is great. I'm so glad everyone is here, while sliding in some backhanded insults along the way. And then it's just all this huge ruse. Then it says, he stepped down and vanished. There was a blinding flash of light, and the guests all blinked. When they opened their eyes, Bilbo was nowhere to be seen. 144 flabbergasted hobbits sat back, speechless. It was generally agreed that the joke was in very bad taste, and that more food and drink were needed to cure the guests of shock and annoyance.
So much like a hobbit. Such a hobbit thing to do.
Oh, gosh. That's great. Everyone's confused. You find out later that people think Gandalf had some play in this, which, sorry, I think in my head I was imagining that he vanishes in this burst of smoke, but really it's just that you find out later that he put the ring on and vanished and just kind of walked away, which I love.
Gandalf added the smoke and light, and
yeah.
Gandalf's adding the magical touches,
yeah.
I just love that.
But I like this visual of or this idea that Bilbo puts the ring on, everyone's like, he's gone, and then meanwhile he's still just walking around the party. If I did that, I would totally go eavesdrop on everyone's conversations.
Right. You could do anything. You could attend your own funeral.
Oh my gosh. That would be, I don't want to go down that path.
Sorry.
Yeah. He's basically just keeping in the back of your mind that while all of this is happening after he vanishes, he's actually sitting there listening to everyone talk him. Yeah. So Bilbo leaves with the biggest queue of all time, and Frodo is left basically to pick up the pieces. And poor Frodo, because everyone rushes to him basically and keeps annoying him and asking him what's going on, and he's like, I don't know any more than you do. Let's see, people call him silly old fool, and Frodo is just I'm gonna go, y'all have fun.
Yeah, I do feel like Frodo gets a bit of the short end of the stick here.
Yeah, because the other thing is that it is also
it's his birthday. Bilbo kind of made it about himself, and there's a bit of a selfish streak in Bilbo, as much as you have to love him.
Oh, 100%. Someone who threw, this party that's basically the pinnacle of pettiness.
Right, yeah. I was just going to say that also, Frodo has received Bilbo's inheritance, and I think that part of that inheritance is just having to deal with the Sackville Bagginses as well. He's Bilbo's been dealing with it for years. It's Frodo's turn.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. So the party continues, and we cut to Bilbo. He has gone back to his house, and he's getting ready to pack up and leave. And Gandalf joins him and starts talking, and you find out that basically they had both been planning this for a while, and that Bilbo had been planning this grand exit and always planned on leaving in a very dramatic fashion, rather. So they start talking, and Gandalf asks him, so you're leaving, Frodo, everything? And Bilbo's like, yeah, sure, everything. Uh-huh.
I guess.
Meanwhile, he's looking at I think at this point he'd placed the ring into an envelope of some kind. And he's like, on second thought, maybe not everything.
I kind of like this one thing. I might take it with me.
And Gandalf at this point makes a good dad joke. So Bilbo asks him to keep an eye on Frodo, and Gandalf goes, I will, 2 eyes if I can. Good going, Gandalf. Good going, Gandalf. Then they start getting more intense. This conversation gets more and more intense as they're talking about the ring, and Bilbo does not want to leave the ring behind, and he feels drawn to it, and he talks about how he feels panicked sometimes because he'll wonder if he's lost it, or he'll wonder where it's gone, and he feels like he has to have it with him at all times because of that. And Gandalf is like, then just leave it behind. And you kind of see the power that the ring has over Bilbo in this short passage, and it talks about how Bilbo grows a little bit darker, and I'm just imagining like his face like transforming into, he's almost getting evil just by talking about the mere idea of leaving the ring and not having it with him anymore.
Yeah, this is really the first time we really get to see any sense of power that Gandalf has. I mean, he's been called a wizard, and we've seen his fireworks display, but we it's implied or even stated explicitly that he has power beyond that. And yeah, we definitely get a sense of it here with that sort of display of shadowy darkness.
Yes. So at this point, I kind of alternated between listening to the audiobook and reading it. And at this point, I was listening to the audiobook, and I don't remember what I was doing, but it made me stop and kind of like stare with my eyes wide open into nothing, because all of a sudden Gandalf got real intense in the audiobook. He was furious, and there was this huge like dramatic swell to his voice, and it got like, you really felt like you said, the power that he holds. And it seems like he doesn't want to be this mean, menacing, powerful wizard, because he, wants to be friendly with the hobbits, and he does fireworks and all this stuff. But when he has to, he can be terrifying, and he is capable of these intense but powerful, great, sometimes terrible things. And I'm excited to see what all happens, because that's just like if I like felt all that and thought all of that just from this like tiny passage where he doesn't even like do any magic. He just talks to Bilbo at this point, and it's just being intimidating, basically.
And I was going to say, part of the key to that description, I think, as well, is like the aftermath of it sort of lends itself to recognizing how powerful it is, because not only how Bilbo reacts, but the way it describes him as afterward just sort of returning to a grizzled old man. I think that's gives a clue to sort of the power he had displayed right before that.
Yeah. So Gandalf, after he does this, the show of power and anger, basically towards Bilbo, agrees to leave the ring, and he is off on his journey to who knows where. They don't really specify. Do we find out? I don't even know if I want to ask that question. If we find out where he is later,
I'll let it be unspoken.
Okay, great. Bilbo is gone. He pieces out. And then shortly after, Frodo comes back, and Gandalf is still there. And Frodo kind of has this moment where he's like, I knew he was leaving, but now that he's actually left, I'm a little sad about it.
Yeah.
I kind of feel sad for Frodo, because he wasn't dealt a great hand of whatever Hobbit cards they have, and
right.
Because they talk about how the first part of the chapter, they talk about how his parents died when he was young, and that's the whole reason basically Bilbo took him in and made him his heir, because he had no family and was orphaned at a young age. And then now, the only semblance of a father figure he probably had is gone, and then now he's left to live in this house alone by himself with, in a town full of people who are, not very fond of Bilbo. And so they probably, and we find out later that they come and pester Frodo about it.
And Frodo even says, he's like, I'd totally give up my inheritance if I could just, go on this journey with Bilbo, which is very sad.
Yeah. Which I guess we should feel better knowing what we know the rest of the book is about, is that now it is time for Frodo's adventure, and that if he had gone with Bilbo, he wouldn't be able to do what happens throughout the rest of the book in the series. So.
Yeah, exactly.
So Gandalf leaves, and then comes one of my favorite parts of this, I think my favorite part of the chapter, which is when they're dividing up for Bilbo's will and what he left behind to all of his family members. And it's the most passive-aggressive way to deal with annoying family members. And I am here for it.
Backhanded gifts.
Yes, I love it. So I won't read off all of them, but just a few of them. For Milo Burrows, hoping it will be useful, from BB. On a gold pen and ink bottle. Milo never answered letters. For the collection of Hugo Bracegirdle, from a contributor on an empty bookcase. Hugo was a great borrower of books and worse than usual at returning them. For Lobelia Saxville Baggins as a present, on a case of silver spoons. Bilbo believed she had acquired a good many of his spoons while he was away on his former journey. Lobelia knew that quite well. When she arrived later in the day, she took the point at once, but she also took the spoons.
So good.
It's so great.
Good.
Which reminds me, sorry, going back to how we were talking about the gossip circle at the beginning, one of the things they were talking about why the Saxville Bagginsons were so upset with Bilbo is that they thought he was gonna die and that he wasn't gonna come back and they were gonna get Baggin. They thought it was theirs when he left. So his mere existence is an annoyance to them.
Well, they didn't only just think that he was dead. Like, they took certain actions upon his death, and I won't give that away. But they definitely thought he was dead and went forward.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to read that. I just given just the short introduction and description of the Saxville Bagginsons and the rest of his family, I can't wait to learn more about them and read more about them. But I love that specifically Lobelia. I love that she totally understood that Bilbo was giving her this backhanded insult. But she took him anyway. I just love that she took the point at once, but she also took the spoons.
she's like, I'm upset, but I also really did want those,
thanks,
so I'm just gonna take them.
Frodo's kind of annoyed with the rest of everyone is coming to bother him, basically, and I can see how, given from the extravagance of the party, how it seems like everyone would assume that they are also getting something, and also given that we know that Bilbo has this huge treasure and all of this stuff that he got from the Hobbit, or the events in the Hobbit, you could assume that it would all be given away, and Frodo's like, what? Sorry, I'm not here, and closes the door, basically.
Yeah.
No one's home. After all of this hoopla, Gandalf once again shows up and is like, hey, I'm gonna leave now. By the way, Frodo, what do you know about this ring? And Frodo's like, not much. Not more than Bilbo mentioned. And Gandalf is like, great, bye! Yeah. And then it just says that Frodo did not see him again for a long time.
I love that Gandalf seems to realize that there's some danger to this ring, but he still remains very calm about it. And maybe you have some insight here. I've always wondered why, because Bilbo sets the envelope on the mantelpiece and says it's for Frodo. And Frodo comes later and Gandalf tells him it's on the mantelpiece, but like, I could almost see Gandalf taking it and not using it, but just to keep it safe from Frodo because it's dangerous. But he doesn't. He honors it, which is very interesting to me.
Well, that's what I was wondering, and that's what I'll talk about more once I get more into the book, and specifically in the next chapter, since I'm about halfway through that now, is that I know that this ring is very dangerous and basically they need to destroy it. So I'm wondering why, if Gandalf knew this great power that it had, and if he knew what it had done to Bilbo, why did no one tell Frodo about this, and why did no one warn Frodo about it until it feels like they only told him about it until it was convenient for the plot.
Right. Well, I think part of it is Gandalf, he doesn't know how dangerous it is. He doesn't know the history of it yet. He sort of has an inkling that it could be dangerous. But even with that little inkling and how much Gandalf knows, because he's very wise, it does still seem kind of strange that he doesn't protect Frodo a little bit more than just saying, don't put it on.
Yes, so Gandalf says, let it be a warning to you to be very careful with it. It may have other powers than just making you vanish when you wish to. I don't understand, said Frodo. Neither do I, answered the wizard. I have merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night. No need to worry, but if you take my advice, you will use it very seldom or not at all. At least I beg you not to use it in any way that will cause talk or rouse suspicion. I say again, keep it safe and keep it secret. You are very mysterious. What are you afraid of? I am not certain, so I will say no more. It just seems very peculiar to me that he's he's afraid, he seems afraid of the ring and very worried about the ring, and makes a point to bring his worries and fears up to Frodo about the ring, but then doesn't do anything about it.
Right. And well, and going back to, you mentioned Gandalf and his connection to like Dumbledore. It is very much a Dumbledore and Harry thing for
yes.
Dumbledore to keep so much information from Harry and only tell him so much. You can tell that, and you'll see it throughout. There are a lot of similarities between the two. I'm sure that was intentional, and you definitely get that here with Gandalf seeming to, tell him this is dangerous, but don't worry, and almost like Gandalf's telling him not to worry, but you get the sense that Gandalf is a little bit worried about it.
Yeah, and reading that back again, I just noticed that it's not necessarily that Gandalf knew all the time about the power of the ring and everything and the dangers. It's that he also doesn't know, and he, in the time between when he leaves now and when we next see him in the next chapter, he is learning more about the ring. Yeah, that's where we leave off chapter 1, a long expected party. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share about that chapter or the prologue?
I'm just curious if you feel like, having not read The Hobbit, if you've missed something, or if you got enough backstory that it was fine, that you still
I feel totally fine. I definitely feel like it would be something that if I had read The Hobbit first, that I would be able to pick up on Easter eggs, or these small connections would make more sense. But I think given the fact that this part of the story is more about Frodo, that it won't be too big of a deal if I don't read The Hobbit first.
Right, yeah. Yeah, you'll be totally fine. Yeah.
And also, just going off of the movies, they made the Lord of the Rings movies first before they made the Hobbit movies. So I think if the Hobbit was so directly tied to the Lord of the, it is a direct tie, but it's not, like you said, how he didn't consider it a sequel. It does feel like it's a different story in the same world.
For sure. And there'll be fun, like when you get to The Hobbit, there'll be fun little parallels between this chapter and the first chapter of The Hobbit, to just the way they're structured, and also even just the names of the chapters. There's a lot of connections that way. And like I said before, I really think this is a bridge between the two stories. And like you said, you don't really need to know that much about Bilbo. This really is more of a sending off of Bilbo and an introduction to this ring with its strange power, really.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Well, that brings us to the close of our episode here. Thank you so much for joining me, Casey. What would you like to plug?
Sure. Well, I just want to say thank you, Mary Clay. This was so much fun, and I love talking about Lord of the Rings, so this was awesome. You guys, if you're interested, I have a podcast that I co-host with my wife. It's called Hello from Elsewhere. We talk about movies mostly, but sometimes books, sort of talking about the themes of stuff. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, it all comes up, and we have a lot of fun over there. So check us out, Hello from Elsewhere. We're on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts. So
yeah, and it's really great. And I started listening to one of the episodes, but I had to stop because you guys started talking about Lord of the Rings.
Oh. We don't bring it up so much that hopefully you can listen to the ones that aren't Lord of the Rings related, but it does come up sometimes for sure. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I had to just mute my computer for a bit and like unmute it periodically to be like, are they still talking about it? No, okay, I'm good. So yeah, go check it out. That's What I'm Talking About is a production of Bacon and Eggs. You can learn more about Bacon and Eggs and everything they do at baconandeggs.media. You can find the podcast on Instagram and Twitter at TolkienAboutPod. The artwork is by Vaishon Brandon. Go support him on Instagram at graphite.vmb. He's awesome, and I'm obsessed with the cover art. Casey, you haven't seen it yet, but you'll see it soon.
No, but I know Vaishon's work, and he's awesome, so I'm super excited to see it.
Oh my gosh. I was like, is it a little narcissistic for me to frame the cover art for my own podcast? But it's really awesome. I love it. And you can find me on Twitter at MCWatt416. Almost messed up my own Twitter handle. And I'm on Instagram as well at MCTurndownForWatt. Thank you so much again, Casey, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's what I'm talking about.